About 10 years ago, I was in the mailroom at ACC, maybe longer, I don't know. And John Herndon said, we're going to start a fiction prize. And I said, count me in. Sounds good. And I'm pleased that Tara Laskowski is here as the 7th winner of the Balcones Fiction Prize for her story collection, Bystanders. She's also the author of the flash fiction collection, Modern Manners for Your Inner Demons, Tales of Dark Etiquette, which is the greatest title ever. Since 2010, she's been the editor of the online flash fiction journal, SmokeLong Quarterly. Novelist Amanda Ward was our final judge for the prize, and she said of Bystanders, her stories pulsed with energy and excitement, like small lightning storms on the page. I was constantly surprised by her characters and finished the book wishing there were more. Ladies and gentlemen, Tara Laskowski.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Okay? Yeah, okay. So this is my first time in Texas today. So thank you so much to Malvern Books and to Austin Community College for having us. This is like such a great honor. I'm so excited to be here. So I have a quick disclaimer before I start reading, and that is that I have a theme for tonight's reading, and the theme is creepy children. So, you know, if you are scared of creepy children, I'm sorry, I might scare you. I have 2 readings. I'm going to read a little bit from Bystanders, and then I'm going to read a flash fiction piece, because like Joe said, I'm editor of Flash Fiction magazine. I really like to read flash fiction, and I like to write it, so I'm going to read a little bit of a short story after I read from Bystanders. So Bystanders is a collection of stories that are about what happens to you and how you change when something really terrible happens to someone else. So a lot of the stories in here are about violent things happening to other people, and then my main characters have to somehow react to them. So they may start out as bystanders, but then they're sort of forced into this action based on sort of these ripple effects of violence and how traumatic things can happen around you, and it sort of forces you to like look at yourself a different way and change. So for example, one of the stories is about a woman who witnesses a really terrible car accident in which a little boy dies, and that causes her to kind of think about her own marriage and, you know, and sort of what the relationships are with people around her. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and there in the 70s, when my parents were growing up, there was a terribly violent newspaper strike in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And it tore apart families. Like, there were fathers and sons that like didn't talk for decades because of this newspaper strike. And I ended up working at the newspaper that had the strike when I right after college, and so and there were some people who still worked there who talked about it and like still were not talking to people who it was affected by. So one of the stories is about a father and a son who are going through this newspaper strike and how that affects their relationship and stuff. So that's kind of my theme, I guess, is violence. But I have a very healthy 6-year-old son, and he's very happy, and I swear to you that none of the things that I'm about to read ever happened to him, so don't be worried. I'm going to read a little bit from the story called The Monitor, and I'm going to read from the middle of it, so I'm just going to give you guys a really quick setup. It's a story about a woman named Myra, and she recently had a baby, so the baby's like just a few months old, and she's going through some postpartum depression. The birth of her child is not going as smoothly as she hoped. Her husband's kind of unhelpful, and in the midst of all of that, she has one of those baby video monitors, which I had as well, and she starts seeing really creepy things in them. And one of those creepy things is, so her signals are getting crossed. So, like it's a wireless video monitor, but she's not seeing her child in the monitor. She's actually seeing another person's bedroom. And she deduces that it's the neighbor across the street who also has a little infant. But in addition to seeing this little baby, she's also seeing an older little boy in the monitor, but the neighbors across the street don't have an older little boy. And that's about all the setup I'm going to give you. Just after Eva turned 3 months, Corey announced he had an out-of-town work conference he had to go to. The first night he was gone, Eva cried for 2 hours before falling to sleep past 10 p.m. Myra didn't even bother to put on pajamas. She just tossed herself across the bed and fell asleep on top of the duvet. When she woke up, she was disoriented. It was dark. She heard a humming of some kind coming from the monitor, and when she picked it up, she saw those airplane pictures above the crib, that sleeping, quiet, good kid that wasn't hers. "Oh, for God's sake," she said out loud, her own voice somehow comforting in the dark. "For God's sake, can't you cry or something?" The screen went white for a few seconds, and she heard a noise like a laugh or a cough. Then the room again, and the little boy she'd seen before standing in the middle of the room, looking at the baby. He's going to wake him up, she thought, and Myra felt this dread, this sense of foreboding, danger, fear. She didn't want that little boy in the room with the baby. She wished she had the neighbors' cell phone numbers. She might have called them, warned them, no matter how stupid it sounded. Then the boy turned and looked up at the monitor. He smiled, cocked his head in the way that most little kids do to melt your heart. But for Myra, it sent a shiver through her core. She felt hot, scared, that raw terror like the time she left her niece Samantha browsing in a jewelry store in the mall and then couldn't find her. The boy was staring at the camera, staring at Myra, his eyes glowing green in the infrared. And then he laughed, a high giggle that seemed to echo and came closer, lunging at the camera. Myra screamed. The monitor screen went fuzzy, and then the digital words, "No signal," printed in red. "They're messing with me," she thought. Myra poured herself a glass of red wine and carried it upstairs with her. She read for a while, keeping the bedroom door open so she could hear Eva if she started crying. Around 2 a.m., Eva did wake, and Myra went into the baby's room and swaddled her arms in a blanket so she wouldn't startle herself. While waiting for her to settle, Myra peeked out at the house across the street and was surprised to find it lit up, lights on downstairs and up. She sat down in the glider and watched on the monitor as Ellie across the street paced back and forth, trying to soothe an obviously upset son. The neighbor's baby was wailing, and she and her husband had no idea how to calm him. "Serves you right," Myra thought, and then grew ashamed of herself. Who was she to be gleeful about someone else's suffering? And yet she couldn't help herself to be relieved that she wasn't the only one having a tough time, that those perfect people across the street got their share of crappy nights. She was beginning to think they had a bionic baby over there. Ellie finally got her son back to sleep and turned off the lights, closed the door. Myra started to turn off the monitor when she saw movement in the baby's room, something in the corner behind the bookcase. And then, as if a spider was crawling down her back, she felt shivers. The boy, standing up, stretching like he'd been taking a nap back there or hiding. She watched with horror. He walked over, peered down at the sleeping baby, and then up at Myra, smiling, waving. Then he rocked backwards, holding onto the crib railing for support, and pushed himself up. She saw him sling his body into the crib. There was a loud noise, a horrible, scary cackle, and then her monitor went blank, black and white static like an old television. She gasped, her fingers through her throat, shook the monitor, turned it on and off. Oh God, Myra said. Her head felt thick, foggy from the wine, and she suddenly hated herself, hated every single thing she did, every choice she'd ever made. She started crying. Should she go over there, make sure everything's okay? What if that boy? And then the monitor screen came back, and the baby was still in his crib, still sleeping like he'd been when his parents had put him down, and the little airplane model was spinning steadily like it always had, round and round and round. Okay, time for creepy children number 2. So this flash piece I wrote last fall, and the story behind it is, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a mystery writer, and she was just telling me this crazy story about when she was growing up and she was in preschool, and her preschool had a Ouija board. And the kids would just play with it, like it was just this board game, and I just thought that was hilarious. And I told her that I was going to steal that. And she was like, go ahead, that's fine. And so this is what I stole. It's called The Possession of the Preschoolers at St. Morgantown Day Academy. The children found the Ouija board buried at the bottom of the game bin. Their teachers were too busy arguing about peanut allergy restrictions and setting up reading circle to notice. No one could remember later if it was Tommy or Susan or Jamal who'd unearthed the box, crushed and tattered and smelling of unfinished basement. It didn't matter much anyway, because after a time all the children were playing with it. They couldn't read the words that were spelled out, but they could hear the voices. Tiny hisses, like a teapot just before it whistles. But when the children got close enough, they could make out the words of men and women, boys and girls, all curling around one another. Pull her hair. Where is my knee? Why did she leave me? Eat the last Oreo. Can I come in? The teachers discussed during their breaks how energized the kids seemed, giggling, delighted at seemingly nothing, how easily they entertained themselves. Lizzie and Jack met the first demon. They were arguing over who got to touch the triangle next when Miss Samantha, who was changing the Johnson boys' diaper, asked them who they were talking to. A man with horns, Lizzie answered. Yes, but do you know what color the horns are? Miss Samantha asked, trying not to breathe through her nose. This was the third time that day for the Johnson kid, even though his parents insisted he was potty trained. He says green, Lizzie said. That's good, dear. He says he wants to come visit, said Jack. Well, just make sure he signs in at the front office, Miss Tabitha called, dragging Sue Bella off of Tiffany before she bit her again. No one blamed the teachers. The state had increased the student-teacher ratios the year before from 1 to 7 to 1 to 10. No one would admit to bringing in the Ouija board, although certain members of the parent advisory group were all too eager to start pointing fingers after Jenny Minahan got sucked up into the portal and started calling for her mother through the baseboards. But by then they'd all missed the obvious signs. Colin's glossed over eyes, little Megan's way too good impression of an owl turning its head all the way around, the smell of burnt hair, the way the window would open every time the class read Where the Wild Things Are. Earlier, when Lizzie McCall started speaking in tongues, well, the teachers thought she was just learning Latin at home and tried to teach the rest of the class how to count to 10 in Chinese. When Olaf awakened the demon, Kristoff, who said he had been murdered by ninja warriors 200 years before, Ms. Kelly encouraged Olaf to bring in his plastic ninjas for show and share. What imaginations, proclaimed the director of the school, who had been observing after Olaf's presentation. She took a photo of the class and posted it on St. Morgantown's Facebook group. Even the dark, foul-smelling stain in the middle of the alphabet carpet did not faze anyone. After all, the Johnson kid always ate far too many pinto beans on burrito day. It wasn't until the black snakes showed up in the closet that any alarm bells went off, and by then it was too late. By then the portal had opened. By then Miss Kelly realized that Lizzie was really levitating, not just showing off some magic trick she'd learned at home. By then the Ouija board had burst into blue and green flames, and the small slit in the back of the bookshelf between the Duplo Lego bins and the floor puzzles grew to the size of a fidget spinner. It sizzled sometimes, and the children said it smelled like burnt Wimpies. It's not important who dared Jenny to stick her foot inside the portal. No one actually thought she'd do it. Later, Ramon told his mother that Jenny's leg came right off, that she hopped along the edge of the room screaming before a clawed arm came out of the air and snatched the rest of her away. Sue Bella said Jenny disappeared in a whoosh. Benjamin remembered none of it and was just mad that Jenny never brought back the Matchbox car she'd borrowed. The teachers tried to pawn it off as an elaborate game of hide and seek. Then they swore Jenny had never even come to school that day. Then they all got fired. None of that even matters. What matters is that the St. Morgantown Day Academy preschool still stands. In fact, it was reaccredited this year. The new director eased up on the peanut allergy restrictions, and the new governor passed lower teacher-to-student ratios. What matters is that each year the children make tiny orange and black flowers out of tissue paper and fasten them to their wrists, spritzing perfume inside that's supposed to remind them of Jenny. She's long since stopped talking through the baseboards. Many of the teachers don't remember her at all, but like all good rituals, they keep her alive. They tell the story as best they can, a cautionary tale for the children to never, ever, ever talk to strangers.
Thank you.